A debate, a crowd, a speaker on stage. But by the end of the night, one of the most prominent conservative voices in America was gone. On September 10th, 2025, Charlie Kirk was gunned down while addressing students at Utah Valley University. The bullet that struck him silenced the event, and within hours, headlines spread across the nation. The suspect, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, was quickly arrested. To many, the case looked simple. Investigators had the suspect, the weapon, even a chilling note that pointed directly to motive. But then, as detectives combed through Robinson's phone records, they uncovered a single call. Just one. A number he had never dialed before, placed only hours before the murder. That last call has become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. Was it a meaningless connection or proof that Robinson wasn't acting alone? Tonight, we dig into the shocking discovery of that final phone call. Charlie Kirk was a man who drew crowds wherever he went. As the founder of Turning Point USA, he had built a national platform. Speaking on college campuses across the country, his supporters saw him as a champion of free speech and conservative values. His critics, as a provocateur who thrived on confrontation. Wherever he appeared, tensions followed. On the evening of September 10th, 2025, Kirk arrived at Utah Valley University for what was supposed to be another stop on his campus speaking tour. Students gathered in the courtyard. Some came to listen, others to challenge. For many, it felt like just another night of debate. But watching from above, on the rooftop of a nearby building, was Tyler Robinson. At 22 years old, Robinson was largely unknown outside his hometown of Washington, Utah, but inside his mind, resentment and anger had been festering. Notes later recovered from his home revealed a disturbing preoccupation with Charlie Kirk. His words painted the picture of a young man convinced that violence was the only answer. When the gunshot rang out, it changed everything. Kirk collapsed instantly. Panic swept through the crowd. Despite the desperate attempts to save him, his injuries were too severe. By the time he was rushed away, it was already too late. Within just 33 hours, police had Robinson in custody. The evidence was damning. His DNA was found on the rifle. The weapon itself traced back to his grandfather, and beneath his computer keyboard, investigators discovered a handwritten note that left little room for doubt. In chilling words, it declared, "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it." For the public, the story seemed over. A lone gunman, clear motive, overwhelming evidence. But investigators weren't satisfied, because when they turned to Robinson's phone, a single entry stood out, one that didn't match any pattern. It was a phone call, just hours before the shooting, to a number no one recognized. And that discovery threatened to change everything. When investigators first opened Tyler Robinson's phone records, they expected routine answers, calls to his roommate, occasional conversations with friends, maybe even digital traces of the anger that had been growing inside him. And for the most part, that's exactly what they saw. The logs were ordinary, predictable, nothing that raised suspicion, until they came across one entry that stopped them cold. Just hours before Charlie Kirk was shot, Robinson had placed a call, a single outgoing call, but this one was different. The number wasn't saved in his phone. It wasn't a family member. It wasn't a classmate. In fact, it had never appeared in his history at all, not once before that night. To experienced investigators, small details like this are never dismissed, because in the final hours before a crime, every action matters. Every word, every message, every call can be a window into a suspect's mind. And so, that single call became more than a line in a log. It became a mystery within the case itself. Was Robinson reaching out for reassurance? Was he confessing his plan to someone else? Or was he simply dialing a stranger, a meaningless number that happened to land in the middle of a timeline filled with deadly intent? At first glance, no one could say, but the timing was impossible to ignore, because this call wasn't made days before. It wasn't part of a normal routine. It came in the final hours at the precise moment when decisions were being made and when the course of countless lives was about to change forever. That single entry refused to fit neatly into the story of a lone gunman, and for investigators, it meant one thing: they had to know who answered on the other end. In criminal investigations, timing is everything. A phone call made in the days before an attack might raise eyebrows, but a call made in the hours leading up to it, that is something different altogether. According to the digital records, Tyler Robinson's mysterious call wasn't placed casually in the middle of the day. It came late in the evening, just hours before he left his home, carrying the rifle that would end Charlie Kirk's life. That placement on the timeline made it impossible to ignore. The call stood out like a flare in the dark, not buried among dozens of other entries, not part of a pattern. Just one call, positioned at the most critical moment. For investigators, that was a signal, because calls made close to a crime often reveal the state of mind of the person about to act. Was Robinson seeking courage? Was he asking for permission? Was he confessing doubts to someone he trusted? Or was it something more sinister: coordination? A final step in a plan that involved more than just one man? Whatever the case, the weight of that phone call grew heavier the closer they looked. It was no longer just about who Robinson dialed. It was about when he chose to dial. And in those final hours, every second mattered. The unanswered question was clear: what happened during that call, and why had Robinson made it at that exact moment? Once investigators flagged the call, their next step was obvious: find out who owned the number. At first, there was no clear match. It wasn't tied to Robinson's roommate, his parents, or the handful of friends he communicated with regularly. It wasn't connected to his employer or any known classmate. On the surface, it appeared to be a complete anomaly, a number without context. But in cases like this, there are no coincidences. A call made just hours before a murder cannot be ignored. Detectives moved quickly. Subpoenas were filed. Carriers were pressed for information. Every available tool was used to peel back the layers of anonymity around that single line of digits. Because one question now loomed larger than all the others: if Robinson truly acted alone, why did he reach out at all? The possibilities multiplied. If the number led to a stranger, perhaps Robinson had dialed in desperation, seeking human contact in his final hours. If it led to a confidant, it might prove that someone else knew exactly what he was about to do. And if it led to something darker, a political ally, an online acquaintance, or even an organizer, then Robinson might not be the only one responsible for Charlie Kirk's death. Behind the scenes, investigators pressed forward, but publicly, they said nothing. Silence surrounded the search, and that silence was deafening, because in the absence of answers, speculation filled the void. When word of the mysterious phone call leaked, it spread faster than the official reports ever could. Headlines began to ask the same question the investigators were wrestling with: who picked up on the other end? Talk shows debated whether Tyler Robinson had acted entirely alone, or whether someone else had played a role in pushing him forward. Some believed the number would eventually be traced back to a close confidant, proof that Robinson had confided in someone who either failed to stop him or, worse, encouraged him. Others feared it pointed to connections with extremist groups, hidden networks that had been quietly fueling his rage. And then there were those who argued the opposite: that the call meant nothing at all, that it was a coincidence, perhaps a misdial magnified by the timing. But speculation rarely sits still. The lack of answers gave rise to theories that painted the case as larger, darker, and more complicated than the lone gunman narrative that had been presented in those first 48 hours. For the public, it was no longer just about Tyler Robinson and Charlie Kirk. It was about the unknown, the possibility that another figure, still unnamed, had been present in the shadows of this crime. And with every day that passed without answers, that possibility grew stronger. For investigators, the unexplained phone call quickly became more than a curiosity. It became evidence. Evidence that had to be treated with the same weight as the rifle, the DNA, and the handwritten note. In every major case, prosecutors know that juries latch onto details like this. A final phone call can suggest premeditation, coordination, or hesitation, It can offer a glimpse into what was happening inside the suspect's mind just before the crime unfolded. If Robinson called someone to confess his plan, it would prove deliberate intent, a sign that the attack wasn't impulsive but carefully thought out. If he called in desperation, the conversation could reveal doubt, hesitation, or even a last plea for someone to stop him. And if the call connected him to a larger network, then the case would be far bigger than anyone first imagined. That is why investigators treated it as more than a loose end. They knew that in a case already steeped in public scrutiny, leaving such a question unanswered wasn't just risky, it was unacceptable. The phone call had become a key one that might unlock the truth of what really happened in the hours before Charlie Kirk was shot. Beyond the police reports, beyond the subpoenas and the forensics, there is another side to this story, the human side. This single record, just a line of numbers in a digital log, carried the power to reshape the entire narrative. It could support the theory of a lone gunman or unravel it completely. For Charlie Kirk's family, every new piece of evidence carries with it a heavy shadow. The discovery of that final phone call was not just a detail in an investigation, it was a haunting reminder that, in those last hours, there may have been a moment of connection, a chance, however small, for something or someone to alter the course of what was about to happen. If Tyler Robinson called a friend, did that friend hear the voice of a man on the edge? Did they sense the storm inside him? Did they miss an opportunity to intervene, to say the one word that could have stopped him? If he called a stranger, the tragedy takes on an even more chilling edge. Somewhere out there may be a person who unknowingly spoke with Robinson mere hours before he pulled the trigger. A person who answered an ordinary ring without realizing they were speaking to someone standing at the edge of an irreversible act. And if the call went unanswered, ringing into silence, that silence itself becomes part of the story. A silence that mirrors the questions left behind. For the thousands who mourn Charlie Kirk, friends, supporters, colleagues, the existence of that call reopens wounds. It sparks a painful kind of speculation. What if Robinson had been met with compassion? What if the person on the other end had chosen to act? What if one conversation could have prevented the loss? Tragedy often turns on such small hinges. A message sent, a word spoken, or in this case, a phone call made in the dark. This is why the human layer matters, because crime is not only about the act itself. It is about the chain of choices, missed chances, and moments of silence that can never be undone. And for those left behind, that single unanswered question, who was on the other end of the line, will echo louder than almost any piece of evidence. Every crime has its details. A weapon, a timeline, a suspect. But some crimes also carry echoes, ripples that stretch far beyond the courtroom. The case of Tyler Robinson and Charlie Kirk is one of them. The unanswered question of that final phone call forces us to look at something bigger, the forces that shape people long before they ever pick up a weapon. In recent years, investigators have warned of a growing trend: young men radicalized not in secret training camps, but in online echo chambers, forums, chat rooms, and digital spaces where anger festers unchecked, where violent thoughts are encouraged, reinforced, and sometimes even applauded. Was Robinson acting under the weight of his own demons alone? Or had he been nudged along by voices in the shadows, hidden figures whispering encouragement when doubt crept in? That final phone call suggests the possibility of connection, and connection changes everything. Because if Robinson was not entirely alone, then his act becomes more than a personal crime. It becomes part of a larger web, one that demands we ask how influence, manipulation, and radicalization quietly operate in the margins of our society. But the implications go deeper still. What does justice look like when one unanswered call has the power to shift an entire narrative? Should prosecutors pursue not just the man who pulled the trigger, but anyone who might have shaped his decision in those final hours? And what responsibility do we, as a society, carry when environments of hate are allowed to grow unchecked? The haunting truth is this: sometimes the story of a crime is not only about the man holding the weapon, but about the invisible hands that pushed him closer to using it. And that is why the last call matters, because it forces us to confront a chilling possibility that Tyler Robinson may not have been the only voice shaping the tragedy that ended Charlie Kirk's life. In the end, the case of Charlie Kirk's murder leaves us with a truth that feels as heavy as it is unresolved. Tyler Robinson sits accused, the evidence against him overwhelming, but the final piece, that one phone call made in the last hours before the gunshot, refuses to settle neatly into the story. Was it a misdial, forgotten as soon as it was made? Was it a desperate attempt to find connection before crossing the point of no return? Or was it something darker, a link to another figure, another influence, another presence in the shadows of this crime? The silence around that question is haunting, because sometimes the most chilling part of a crime isn't the act itself, but the silence that follows. And so we are left with questions. Did Robinson truly act alone? Could the person on the other end have made a difference? Was justice served? Or is there more to this story than we have been told? These are questions only time and truth can answer. But one thing remains certain. The smallest details, a note, a message, a phone call, can carry the heaviest weight in the pursuit of justice. What do you think? Was the last call an overlooked clue, or the key to understanding what really happened that night? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know where you're watching from. And if you want to stay with us as we continue to follow every turn in this case and others like it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because together we will keep asking the questions that others leave behind. This is the story of a call that may never be forgotten. A call that, in its silence, still speaks volumes.